The Centurion Project. Written by the 8th Day of Night. Chapter 24. Distractions. Journal entry. Day 1101. I'm always a bit surprised when I find stores of food. Of course, it's never any of the good stuff, but why did people always stock up on random shit? Like, really? 37 jars of peanut butter? Why? Why is there an entire cabinet in your house dedicated to just peanut butter? You couldn't at least put some jelly in there. I am extremely grateful that I never developed a peanut allergy like... Anyway. It's good news that I can eat the stuff. I should be able to get it to last at least a month, if not more. Depends if I can find something to put it on. Eating raw peanut butter out of the jar is only gonna get me by on a jar a day. I wish crackers kept better. I haven't seen one of those salty fuckers in 3 months. Always turns to mush if the littlest bit of water gets on them. Elias walked slowly through the halls, his thumbs tucked into his sword belt. Though she was trying to be sneaky, a royal guard's pony was shadowing him as he wandered aimlessly through the castle corridors. He didn't know where Bookbinder and Nightflash were. The pair had been absent when he woke up. After taking a quick shower and waiting around for a few minutes, Elias had decided to get his breakfast on his own. After passing a few guard stations, Scarlet had come rocketing around the corner, nearly tackling Elias as he rolled to a stop, his tongue lolling out his mouth in a pant. The Pegasus claimed that he had just seen Elias and tried to catch up, but from the looks he received from some of the guards, Elias suspected that he was supposed to have an escort while wandering about. Why nobody bothered to tell him that, Elias didn't know. Regardless, Scarlet, after catching his breath, had immediately begun talking about the rest of the guard exercises. When they came upon the cafeteria, they were met by a pacing Granite, who smiled happily when he saw Elias and Scarlet. He didn't say anything, merely followed right behind them, smiling brightly as his tail swished back and forth. Elias remained largely silent at the meal, brooding as he watched those around him. A small part of him was nervous about what his fellow guards thought of him, but when he would find no trace of fear from either Scarlet or Granite, it made him genuinely happy. If his friends were willing to move past the incident without issue, he was okay with the rest of the guard treating him like as a threat. Unfortunately, he was technically on vacation, so when they had to go to their shifts, Elias found himself alone with nothing to do. He had tried wandering toward the training grounds, but his shadow had not so subtly coughed and shook her head when he began going in that direction. A minor adjustment sent him towards the infirmary, but Scabble was absent, out on the call for some house fire in Canterlot proper. That left him to continue wandering. He thought about who he could talk to, but quickly realized that he had nobody outside of the guard. Nightflash and Bookbinder were guards' ponies, as were all of his friends. Luna had to run court, and if not that, she had a dozen other political things to do, so that avenue was a bust. His favorite pastimes included reading and fighting. He had far too much energy to sit still and read, and he was actively being pushed away from fighting, which left him at a loss. A tinge of worry stitched across his chest as he realized that he hadn't talked to his adoptive parents in a while. He wondered where... Elias stopped dead in the middle of the hallway, staring into nothing as his mind worked. When had that happened? It wasn't out loud, and nobody else knew, but he had thought about Nightflash and Bookbinder as his parents. Was that a bad thing? Wasn't it something he ultimately wanted? Elias almost wished that he would have a panic attack so that his personality would split so he could have somebody to talk to. As he stood stiff as a plank, he found that his mind decided to leave him be for a moment, and so his thoughts were his and his alone. With that freedom, Elias found himself paralyzed with indecision. Unbeknownst to the now frozen human, Anyon was chasing after her Pegasus, a lithe purple maid who had been flirting with the griffon for weeks. She had challenged him to the old race of lace game, and Anyon knew he could catch the flighty creature this time. He had a real chance with this one. That laugh, those shining eyes, oh, he knew he just had to get her. Maybe they couldn't make little griffin babies, but then again, there was that one doctor in the lower Canterlot districts. Anyon heard, primarily through a certain alicorn who seemed to be one of the 3 creatures on the planet that visited him, that the unicorn could make any species compatible. So if he could just focus on that purple tail before him, maybe he could get a few kids of his own. Now that would be a treat.
You're gonna have to move faster than that, you old buzzard.
Split Tip sang over her shoulder. Anion huffed loudly as she darted nimbly around the corner. Damn, Facade could move fast, and he wasn't as young as he used to be. He had the endurance, but she would end the race before he caught up, and then she'd tease him, just like always. She'd been kind enough to give him a date, though, and while he got a bit mixed up with pony and griffin mating rituals, he thought she had fun. She'd even tried a bit of steak. Sure, she immediately spit it out, but the attempt was there. Anion ran at the corner, taking a deep breath as he tried to pick up his speed, only to come to a crashing halt as he realized that Split Tip was staring at a certain curled-up Youngblood, concern written plainly on her face. Anion took a second to catch his breath before he approached her. Anion flicked her lightly with his wing as he stood beside her, staring down at Elias. She glanced at him with an apologetic look.
Sorry, Fuzzy, but that doesn't count.
Anion huffed. Continental bird gets something. Split Tip smiled and gave him a peck on the cheek.
How about a snuggle later? You got closer this time.
Anion blushed for a second, giving her a jerky nod. Thanks for your understanding. The blush dropped as he sighed, looking at the muttering human before him. Why don't you go back to work, Tip? I think I can handle this, at least till I can get a princess here. The young bug looked lost. His eyes seemed vacant as he stared right past the winged creature standing above him. His legs weren't quite tucked to his chest, but they were close. His hands hung limply at his side, and his head rested against the stone wall. His mouth moved, and though there was sound coming out, it was nonsensical and soft. Tip leaned against Anion.
Are you sure? I can run and grab a guard. See if maybe he's supposed to be with some pony right now?
Anion shook his head. Nah, this is something else. I got a rundown from Princess Luna. He's free to wander, but it's looking to me that maybe that wasn't such a good idea. Go on now. I gotta put on the mean bird act to get him moving. Tip chuckled and rubbed against him.
Save some for me later, Annie. You know I positively love the mean bird act.
Anion swatted at the Pegasus as she danced away, laughing lightly. Away, ya harpy! Anion squawked. You know better than to use your charms in the castle.
See you later, lover,
she called happily as she slipped down another hallway. Anion blushed again as he grumbled, something about Pegasi and their fur. Then his eyes settled on the mumbling human before him. Anion frowned, kicking the young blood's foot. When that didn't provoke a response, Anion did it again, this time much harder. The young blood didn't so much as twitch. Anion huffed as he looked around for some pony to pass this off on. All he found was a single royal guard, trying to remain incognito, who just stared at him with bored look in her eyes. Anion glared at the pony. Ain't this supposed to be your job? He asked gruffly. The unicorn shrugged.
My orders are to make sure he doesn't hurt himself or others. Whatever else he does with his time is up to him.
Anion grumbled again as he kicked the young blood again. Then the human didn't move, and Anion huffed. Oi, young blood, get up. The human remained still. Anion frowned and waved a hand in front of the human's face. The human's eyes didn't even track the movement. Growling softly, Anion grabbed hold of the young blood's dress and yanked him back and forth while squawking loudly in his face. Get up, you skinny bastard! Anion was pleased when he provoked a reaction out of the human. He was less pleased when that reaction was to lash out with a fist, punching him in the jaw. Anion fell back with a yelp, clutching his beak as the young blood looked at him in surprise, his fist pulled back ready to strike again. Why are you yelling at me? Elias asked, stunned at the sight of the griffin. The hallway had been empty a second ago. Where had the bird come from? Anion snorted as he rubbed his chin. I think I should be the one asking the questions. Why are you just sitting there, young blood? You looked off. Elias opened his mouth to say that he was standing, not sitting, but with the griffin standing over him, he found that he was definitely sitting. Elias frowned, pushing himself to his feet. He scratched the back of his head as he looked around, finding nothing of note until his eyes settled back at Anion, who was watching him with curiosity. You are right, young blood. Elias looked up and down the hallway, the frown still present on his face. He ran a hand over his face and he took a deep breath. Had he passed out? It clearly wasn't a panic attack, because Anion seemed somewhat calm, and the real guard hadn't run off. Elias cracked his neck before looking back at the old griffin. Fine, just lost right now, I guess. I'm usually at work during this time of night. Anion snorted. You're telling me you don't do anything but work? That sounds awfully dull, if you ask me. Elias shrugged, scratching his ear. Something to do, I guess. Anion squinted as he looked at the human up and down, and he grunted softly. Are you really telling me you don't do nothing but guard stuff? What about your free time? Elias shrugged. I train or I read, he replied. He gestured towards the royal guard standing nonchalantly behind him. She won't let me do the first, and I'm too restless to do the second. I really don't do much else. Work, eat, fight, sleep. It's simple, but it works most of the time. Spoken like a young blood. Anion huffed. He then glared at the black-armored unicorn. Speaking of you, I thought you said you're supposed to stop him from hurting ponies, he said, gesturing at Elias. Where were you when he swung at me? The unicorn shrugged.
I would hit you too if you yelled in my face. Besides, he didn't hit you that hard.
Anion rubbed his jaw and grumbled, glaring at the unicorn briefly, before he looked back to Elias, who still felt lost. He couldn't find anything to focus on, and in truth, there was nothing he really wanted to focus on. Anion stared at him silently for a moment, then grunted and shook his head, grabbing Elias's tunic with a claw. This ain't gonna do, young blood. We gotta get you doing something, and I know just the place to start. Luna sighed as she pored over her paperwork while she walked towards the scrying room. The night court had been uneventful, which meant that she had to work on some of the overflow from her sister's court. 4 years since her return, and still very few ponies came to petition. Sure, it was largely because the disputes were usually dealt with by the lower court system that hadn't existed before her banishment, but somebody could make it to her level, right? Either way, the nobles were too lazy to stay up during the night, and they frequently pestered Celestia. So when Luna found a calm night court, followed by a calm dreamscape, she helped sort through the trash to find proposals that actually had merit. Unfortunately, even the honest nobles had to submit massive packets of information that Luna was forced to sift through, line by line, searching for the one sentence that could sign over the kingdom to some greedy pony. While she had no doubts about the intentions of Fancy Pants, she still had to check the infrastructure improvement bill didn't have any unnecessary clauses, which was bureaucracy. Luna trotted past Anion's normally quiet smithy, only to stop when she heard a myriad of curses flowing forth. She looked at the door curiously, lighting a horn to check that the sound-deafening enchantments were still in place. When she confirmed that they were, she became even more curious. Luna pressed her ear to the door, listening to 2 distinct voices go back and forth, in what sounded like 2 distinct languages. Luna eyed the packet still suspended in her aura, then listened to the ground of something metal being thrown. It was a perfect excuse to delay more paperwork. Luna cracked open the smithy door, and the stream of curses grew louder as she beheld the sight of Anion screaming at the top of his lungs at Elias, who was screaming right back, his hand hovering over a pair of tongs. Luna could tell that something was in the furnace in the front, but she really couldn't tell why Anion was yelling over it. Look, you daft idiot. You take it out when I say you take it out. Not before, not after. The griffin squawked. Or maybe you trust me to actually count to 30, you feathered fuck. Elias shouted back, ducking under a bar of steel that had been thrown at his head. You told me 30 seconds, so I'm counting to 30 seconds. Now fuck off so I can focus, or I'm going to mess it up. You already messed it up, you clumsy tall pony. I said count to 30 40 seconds ago. Not by my count, Elias replied angrily. Luna counted to 6 before Elias's hands dropped on the tongs, pulling out a long, thin piece of glowing steel. Anion hopped across the smithy in a single flap, trying to snatch the tongs from the shouting human, who almost dropped the heated metal on his foot. The two shouted at each other in a string of foreign curses as Elias shoved the griffin away from him with an elbow. He then moved quickly towards an anvil, laying the glowing steel across it as he flailed about for a hammer. Anion provided one, following it quickly with a swing at Elias's head with his claw. The human took the slap as he swung at the steel, backhanding Anion across the beak as he pulled the hammer back. The griffin squawked indignantly. "Ya call that a hit? The steel will be cool by the time it's hammered flat. I've had breezes who could swing a hammer better." Elias ignored him as the hammer came down again, focusing on the task in his hands. Anion fell silent as he watched over Elias' shoulder, occasionally making minute adjustments to the man's posture. Anion glanced up to find Luna watching the pair with no small amount of confusion. He gave her a small wave before he zeroed back onto Elias' swings. "A bit softer now, lad. You got it where you need to start making the small changes. Little taps now. Keep 'em fast and low." Elias responded silently to the advice, hammering across the piece of steel. He raised the steel before his eyes, then laid it back down, stepping out of the way so Anion could get a closer look. The griffin frowned as he handled the steel, and looked to Luna like a knife blade. He turned the still glowing metal over in his talons, then nodded as he laid it back on the anvil. "Look close, young blood. You almost got it perfect this time." He snatched the hammer from the rack suspended above their heads and began tapping near the point of the knife. "You made the tip a bit thick. Nothing we can't fix, but it'll make it a beast to sharpen down later on if we don't get it now." Elias nodded. "Is that something I'll learn to eyeball with practice?" Anion nodded as he raised the blade before his eyes. "That it is, young blood. Takes years, but you'll get it." Anion grinned before dropping the blade into the quenching bucket. He let it sit for a moment before pulling it back out, inspecting the blade once more. He motioned for Elias to get close. "Now you see there, that's what you should be aiming for a blade like this. Keep the tip thin like the rest of the blade, but not so much that it's gonna snap off when you cut into a bar of soap." Anion patted the human on the back and dropped the blade back into the quenching bucket. "Good for your first time, young blood. Now start feeling the furnace again. You let it get too low, and you're lucky the steel stayed as hot as it did." Elias rolled his eyes and gave Anion his middle finger as he walked towards the back of the smithy, snatching up the shovel on the way. Luna felt her confusion at the rapid shifts of conversational tone creep across her face, and Anion looked at her with a grin. "Evening, princess," he said. "What can I do you for?"
I heard the sounds of an argument coming from within your workshop and decided to investigate, as you are usually alone. I certainly did not expect to find Guardsman Brighton here with you." She glanced around the griffin as Elias came back to the front, stripped to his undergarments and pulling a large cart weighed down with what looked like coal. The human didn't acknowledge anyone as he let the handle drop. He stabbed into the pile of coal with a shovel, guiding it over to the furnaces. Anion looked over his shoulder and the human snorted. "Aye, just teaching the young blood a bit about the craft. Found him wandering all crazy like, so I decided to give him something to do. Too bad he's got the blacksmithing sense of a fool." Anion finished with a squawk. "I blame my teacher," Elias replied without looking up. "A good worked pony never blames his tools." Anion snapped at him. Elias smirked. "Anion, if I didn't know better, I think you just called yourself a tool." Anion snorted again, looking back to Luna. "He ain't terrible, and he can do the heavy lifting, so he's good enough for me. Do you need him?" "I suppose we could begin our nightly activities early," Luna replied. "What was your argument about? We have been cataloging Elias's aggressive periods in hopes of finding what spurs his anger."
Anion tilted his head in confusion. "Argument?" He looked back to Elias, who met his confused stare with a shrug before continuing to shovel coal. Anion looked back to Luna. "We weren't having no argument. We were just working in here. I was giving the young blood pointers and such."
"By yelling at each other?"
Luna asked in disbelief. Anion shrugged, looking to Elias again. "Just talking, ain't we, young blood?" The human nodded, wiping his brow as he leaned on the shovel. Elias squinted at Luna. "I don't know if you've noticed, princess, but everyone seems awfully prim and proper around here. I try to keep it toned back, but Anion's the only person who actually speaks like a normal person." He stabbed the shovel into the pile, putting one last scoop into the furnace, before setting the shovel down. "It's actually been nice to cut loose and swear. If I so much as say the word fuck these days without some reason behind it, I get looks like I just murdered a small child. It's just a word, yet everyone gets up in arms about it." He shook his head and sighed. "I do not understand it, but it's not an issue, I guess. I already made the change, so who fucking cares?" Anion grinned and nodded, grabbing a towel from the overhang to toss at Elias. The human caught it deftly as he snatched up his tunic and his sword belt wiping himself down as he walked to the front of the smithy. So, what do you need me for, princess?
Have you spoken with Bookbinder or Nightflash today?
Luna asked, answering his question with a question. Elias wiped off his hands, tossing the towel into the corner far from the furnaces. He shook his head as he pulled his tunic over his head. Can't say I have. They were gone from my room before I got up. Luna smiled.
Excellent. Then we must be off. There is much that needs to be done this night.
She turned to leave the room, while Elias looked at question to Anon, who shrugged and non-answer. Elias sighed and made his way around the counter, following Luna into the much brighter and cooler hallway. He briefly wished that he had more to wear, and he made a note to go talk to the tailor later about getting some winter clothes. Luna smiled at him as she motioned for him to follow. Elias fell in behind her, frowning at the back of her head as she led him through a maze of corridors. There we go. So glad to have Anyon back. I was kinda worried we weren't gonna see him for a while. He's one of my favorite voices to do. What else are my favorites are my wonderful Patreons. Thank you Chase the Master, HKH4 aka Texture, The Animated Ghost, Solus, Mark the Wolf, and Stu Hex. Also, a large thank you to Silent Titan. Seriously, you guys are amazing and I appreciate your support so much. Had to take a little break. I hope you guys don't mind too much. I've been putting out a lot more longer videos with more editing, so I'm gonna try to go back to the 20 minutes. It really does help with consistency with uploading. Putting out like 30-minute episodes is quite a lot of editing and takes a lot of time out of my day. But hey, I hope you guys have enjoyed this. Anyways, this has been Firehearth. Have a wonderful day.